My child. Stop scrolling for a moment. Do not let this message pass by as if it were written for someone else. There is a reason your eyes stopped here today. There is a reason your heart feels strangely still while the world around you keeps moving. Something has already begun to shift behind the scenes, even if you cannot yet see it with your natural eyes. What you are about to hear is part of a fictional spiritual story, but perhaps it will encourage your heart in ways you did not expect. Stay with this message until the end. Something meaningful is waiting to unfold, and every moment brings you closer to a truth that changes everything. There have been days when you wondered why certain people suddenly became distant. You questioned why conversations changed the moment your name appeared. You searched your own heart, asking whether you had unknowingly caused pain or disappointment. You replayed memories over and over, trying to understand where everything began to unravel. Yet the answers always seemed hidden behind a curtain you could never lift. I have watched every silent tear that never reached another person's eyes. I have seen every moment when you smiled for others while quietly carrying questions that no one knew you were asking. Even when your voice remained calm, your heart whispered, "What happened? Why did everything change so quickly?" Those whispers were never ignored. They were heard long before you spoke them. Do not hurry away from this message. Stay here a little longer. Every passing moment is uncovering another piece of a story that has been hidden for far too long. You may think this is simply another message, but the deeper you listen, the more you will realize that something extraordinary is unfolding. There was a season when misunderstanding surrounded your name like a thick morning fog. Words traveled from one person to another. Small assumptions became larger stories. Quiet opinions slowly turned into confident conclusions. The people speaking believed they understood everything, yet they had only gathered scattered fragments instead of the complete picture. What they never realized was that truth has a remarkable way of waiting patiently. It does not rush. It does not compete with rumors. It simply stands quietly until the perfect moment arrives. Then, when the time is right, it speaks with a strength that no false story can silence. You have often believed that those who misunderstood you would never see beyond what they had been told. You wondered whether your reputation had been permanently changed by voices that spoke before they listened. Those thoughts weighed heavily upon you. Yet there were unseen moments taking place beyond your awareness. Someone whose opinion matters more than you realize began noticing small details that did not fit the story they had been told. One question became two. Two questions became many. The confident version of events they had accepted suddenly began showing cracks. Nothing dramatic happened at first. There was no loud confrontation. No emotional speech. Only quiet observations that refused to disappear. Sometimes the greatest turning point begins with a single unanswered question. Pause here for another moment. Do not skip ahead in your thoughts. The next part of this story carries a weight you have not expected. Every sentence is bringing another hidden door into view. Your soulmate had trusted someone's words without realizing they were incomplete. They believed what sounded convincing because it came from a familiar voice. It seemed reasonable. It appeared believable. Yet truth often hides beneath what appears obvious. Days passed. Life continued. But something deep inside their heart refused to stay settled. Each time your name appeared, they felt an unexpected pull. Not confusion. Not regret. Something deeper. It was as though every peaceful moment quietly asked them, what if there is more to this story? That question became impossible to ignore. They remembered conversations they once overlooked. Expressions on your face that suddenly carried new meaning. Moments when your silence spoke louder than explanations ever could. Little by little, their certainty disappeared. The story they once believed no longer fit the memories they carried inside their heart. That realization changed everything. Do not leave now. Something greater is about to be revealed. Many people believe that hidden things remain hidden forever. But there comes a season when even the smallest thread begins pulling apart an entire tapestry of deception. Not through revenge. Not through anger. Simply because truth refuses to stay buried forever. Your soulmate started connecting moments that once seemed unrelated. A conversation from months ago. A message that suddenly sounded different. A strange reaction from someone who appeared unusually eager to keep you apart. What once seemed like coincidence slowly became impossible to ignore. They began asking themselves why certain people always discouraged them from understanding your side. Why every explanation about you felt strangely rehearsed. Why every warning carried the same tone. Why every conversation ended with the same conclusion before you were ever given a chance to speak. Their heart became restless. Not because they wanted conflict. Because something inside them longed for honesty. Sometimes the greatest spiritual awakening begins not with a miracle, but with the courage to question what everyone else accepted without thinking. Stay until the end. There is still something you have not heard. You once believed that your silence made you invisible. You assumed that because you never defended yourself loudly, your story would never be heard. But there is strength in quiet integrity that many people fail to recognize until much later. Every kind word you spoke. Every act of patience. Every time you chose peace over argument. Every moment you refused to return hurt with hurt. Those moments never disappeared. They became evidence waiting for the right eyes to notice. Your soulmate began remembering those quiet moments one by one. They remembered how your kindness never demanded applause. How your generosity expected nothing in return. How your compassion remained steady even when others misunderstood you. These memories stood in complete contrast to everything they had been told. The difference became impossible to ignore. Something inside them shifted. It was not sudden rage. It was something much deeper. It was the realization that someone they cared about may have been deeply misunderstood. That realization carries a unique kind of emotion. It shakes assumptions. It awakens compassion. It invites truth back into places where confusion once ruled. Take another quiet moment. Breathe in these words. The next revelation is even greater. There were voices that believed they had complete control over the narrative. They assumed that once enough people accepted their version of events, no one would ever question it again. Confidence grew inside them because silence often looks like agreement. But silence is not always agreement. Sometimes silence is simply waiting for the right season, the right conversation, the right discovery, the right heart willing to listen. Your soulmate entered that season without realizing it. Every passing day placed another missing piece into their hands. Until eventually, the picture became clear enough that they could no longer pretend everything made sense. Their heart responded before their mind found words. Not because they enjoyed conflict. Because honesty matters. Because love cannot grow where deception remains hidden. Because genuine connection always searches for truth. Do not skip this moment. What comes next changes the direction of everything. Imagine discovering that someone you respected had shaped your opinion using half-truths. Imagine realizing that precious time had been lost because important pieces were intentionally left out. Imagine remembering every opportunity that quietly slipped away because you believed something that was never fully true. These thoughts flooded their heart one after another. Questions multiplied faster than answers. How much had they missed? What else had they misunderstood? How different would everything have been if they had simply listened to you instead? Those questions echoed through every quiet moment. Even ordinary days no longer felt ordinary. Every memory returned carrying new meaning. Every conversation replayed differently. Every decision seemed worthy of another look. Truth has that effect. Once it arrives, nothing looks exactly the same again. You may feel forgotten today. You may believe no one truly understands your heart. But stories change. Perspectives change. Hearts change. And sometimes they change at the exact moment when you have almost stopped expecting anything beautiful to happen. Remain here. Something remarkable is still ahead. Your soulmate found themselves unable to dismiss the growing conviction within. They tried returning to ordinary routines. They tried focusing on other responsibilities. They tried convincing themselves they were simply overthinking. Yet every attempt only made the questions louder. The truth has a gentle persistence. It does not shout. It patiently knocks. Again. And again. And again. Until someone finally opens the door. At last. One unexpected moment arrived. A simple conversation. A passing comment. A tiny detail that seemed insignificant to everyone else. But to your soulmate, it became the missing piece. Everything suddenly aligned. The timeline. The conversations. The inconsistencies. The strange reactions. The repeated warnings. Nothing fit together the way they once believed. In that instant, the entire story changed. Their heart raced. Their thoughts refused to slow down. Not because they hated the person who had spoken falsely, but because they finally understood what those words had cost. They understood how much distance had been created. How many opportunities had quietly disappeared. How many emotions had remained unspoken? How much unnecessary pain had grown from something that should never have happened? Stay with this message. The greatest revelation has not yet been spoken. Your story is not ending where misunderstanding began. It is moving toward a chapter where hidden things rise into the light. Where quiet hearts find courage. Where patient love discovers new strength. Where truth begins restoring what confusion once separated. Yet there is one final detail that even your soulmate has not fully uncovered. One name. One conversation. One hidden reason behind everything that was said. The moment they discovered the first clue, they realized someone had been protecting a secret much bigger than anyone imagined. And as they took one more step toward uncovering that hidden truth, they saw something that stopped them completely. They whispered only a few trembling words. No, this cannot be the real reason. And what they discovered next would change everything. My beloved child. Do not turn away now. Stay with this message a little longer, because the moment that has been quietly approaching is finally beginning to unfold. If your heart has been carrying questions for far too long, keep listening. What comes next in this fictional spiritual story is not the end of the journey, it is the beginning of a revelation that no one expected. Something hidden has started to come into the light, and once light enters a room, darkness can no longer pretend to be the truth. Your soulmate stood in complete silence after discovering that first clue. The room around them seemed unchanged, yet everything inside them felt different. Their heartbeat became heavier with every passing second. They replayed every conversation they had ever heard about you, and suddenly those conversations no longer sounded trustworthy. The words that once appeared convincing now felt carefully arranged, as though someone had wanted them to believe only one side of the story. They asked themselves a question they had never asked before. What if I judged someone whose heart I never truly understood? That single thought refused to leave. The more they reflected, the more uncomfortable they became. They remembered moments when you had shown kindness without asking for recognition. They remembered the calm way you responded even when life gave you every reason to become bitter. They remembered how you never tried to force anyone to choose your side. Instead, you quietly continued walking with dignity. Now those memories carried a completely different meaning. Do not skip this part. Stay until the end. Something even greater is waiting just ahead, and every new revelation is bringing the truth closer. Your soulmate realized that every negative story about you had come from the same direction. Different conversations, but strangely similar words. Different occasions, but the same conclusion. It was as though someone had carefully planted seeds of doubt over a long period of time, hoping they would grow into permanent distance. The realization was overwhelming. Not because they wanted someone to blame. Because they suddenly understood how easily a sincere heart can be influenced when it is given only fragments instead of the whole picture. They closed their eyes and whispered quietly, "How did I not see this before?" No one answered. But deep inside, another realization began taking shape. Truth had been patiently waiting for this exact moment. It had never disappeared. It had simply waited until their heart was ready to receive it. Pause for a moment. Something extraordinary is still unfolding. As the days continued, your soulmate found themselves noticing details that had once escaped their attention. They remembered the expressions on people's faces whenever your name was mentioned. They remembered awkward pauses that suddenly made sense. They remembered someone changing the subject whenever they asked too many questions about you. Those moments had seemed ordinary before. Now they felt impossible to ignore. One memory after another returned with startling clarity. A smile that suddenly looked forced. A warning that suddenly sounded rehearsed. An explanation that now felt incomplete. The puzzle pieces were quietly assembling themselves. Your soulmate no longer needed anyone else to convince them. Their own heart had begun speaking. And sometimes the quiet voice within carries more weight than 1,000 loud opinions. Stay here. Do not leave yet. The most emotional moment is still approaching. One evening, while everyone else carried on with ordinary life, your soulmate found themselves sitting alone. No distractions. No conversations. Only silence. In that silence, something unexpected happened. Instead of remembering the accusations they had heard, they remembered your kindness. They remembered the warmth in your voice. They remembered moments when you celebrated other people's victories instead of seeking attention for yourself. They remembered your patience, your compassion, your honesty. Those memories came one after another until tears quietly filled their eyes. Not because they were weak. Because they finally realized they may have misunderstood someone whose intentions had always been genuine. That realization carried an emotional weight unlike anything they had ever experienced. It was not anger. It was heartbreak. Heartbreak over lost time. Heartbreak over unanswered questions. Heartbreak over opportunities that quietly slipped away while they believed words that should have been questioned from the beginning. Do not skip. Stay until the end. There is still one truth waiting to be revealed. For the first time, your soulmate stopped asking, "What did they say about you?" Instead they began asking, "Why would someone want me to believe that?" That question changed everything. Because once the why appears, the entire story begins transforming. Every conversation gained new meaning. Every silence carried hidden significance. Every unexpected distance suddenly pointed toward something much deeper. Your soulmate realized this had never been about simple misunderstanding. There had been another reason. A reason carefully hidden beneath polite smiles and convincing explanations. But they still did not know what it was. Not yet. They only knew one thing. Someone had been protecting a version of events that no longer matched reality. That realization stirred something powerful inside them. Not revenge. Not bitterness. A determination to seek truth with an open heart. Sometimes healing begins the moment someone becomes willing to ask better questions. Continue listening. The next part changes everything once again. Without telling anyone, your soulmate quietly began observing. They listened more carefully. They spoke less. They paid attention to details they once ignored. And something remarkable happened. People often reveal the truth without realizing they are doing it. A nervous expression. A sentence interrupted halfway through. An unnecessary explanation. An uncomfortable silence. Tiny moments began exposing cracks in a story that once seemed impossible to challenge. Each crack allowed more light to enter. Each discovery strengthened their conviction. Your soulmate finally understood that appearances can be carefully managed, but genuine truth has a way of revealing itself through the smallest details. Day after day, their confidence in the old story faded. Their confidence in your character quietly grew. Something inside them whispered, "I need to know what really happened." That whisper became impossible to silence. Do not scroll away. Stay here. There is still something waiting that you have not yet heard. As they reflected on everything, another unexpected emotion appeared. Regret. Not because they could change yesterday. Because they wished they had trusted their own heart sooner. They wondered how many opportunities had quietly passed by. How many conversations never happened. How many moments could have looked completely different if they had simply paused long enough to hear your side. Their heart became heavier. But alongside the regret came hope. Hope that perhaps the story was not over. Hope that perhaps truth still had another chapter waiting to be written. Hope that perhaps distance did not have to become the final ending. Sometimes hope arrives quietly. Not with loud celebration. But with one gentle realization. It may not be too late. Those words remained in their heart long after everyone else had gone to sleep. And while the world rested, something even more unexpected happened. A message arrived. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Just a simple piece of information from someone who had no idea how important it would become. One ordinary sentence. Yet it confirmed every growing suspicion your soulmate had been carrying. The final wall of uncertainty collapsed. Everything suddenly became clear. They finally understood who had shaped the false narrative. But when they learned the real reason those lies had been spoken, they stood completely speechless. Because it was never truly about you. It was about something hidden in another person's heart that no one else had noticed. And the moment your soulmate decided they could no longer remain silent, someone unexpected stepped into the story. Holding a truth so astonishing that it would change every relationship, every conversation, and every decision from that moment forward.